Here's a really intriguing thought for what governments could do. They could borrow a bunch of money. They could manage to make the interest payments as the debt accumulated because conditions were unusually favorable. And then things could go wrong and they could suddenly find themselves squeezed, panicked, unable to raise taxes, unable to cut spending, up against the wall. Let's try that again. Actually, let's not. I mean, if you've ever had anything like that happen to you in your personal life, if you've been struggling to make the minimum payments on your credit cards, you know what a nightmare it is to have unsustainable debt. And if you've been alive and awake in this country for more than about 25 years paying attention to public policy, then you've seen it before. Normally in been there, done that, we take a longer historical perspective, and certainly there are many cases of governments going back through time who've borrowed money they could not afford to pay back, who have debauched the currency in an attempt to run down their debt only to see interest rates skyrocket, and who have sometimes managed to live out John Maynard Keynes' axiom that if you owe the bank £10,000, you have a problem, but if you owe the bank £10 million, the bank has a problem. More than one major international banking house has been destroyed by overexposure to irresponsible government borrowers. But let's just think about the 1980s here, because we've just had a new Fraser Institute study come out that talks about what proportion of government revenue is going to interest payments. And it's starting to creep up into double digits, which, again, the great and the good would say, oh, it's not a problem, debt to GDP ratio and all, it's very manageable. Sure, it may be more than some social programs, but I mean, it's an investment in whatever the heck it was an investment in. But the problem is, at the moment, interest rates are at unnaturally low levels. Governments are, in fact, attempting to debauch the currency, but that trick never works. Sure, you can trigger runaway inflation, but you cannot keep real interest rates down indefinitely. What happens when they start going back up? Do you remember, under Brian Mulroney, who ran as a right-winger, but governed from the left and destroyed his own party? A little political lesson there while I'm at it. By the late 1980s, interest payments were around $45 billion in the worst year, nearly half of program spending, which was around 100 and change. So about a third of government spending was going for interest on the debt. Right now the figure is far lower, although in fact government spending is far higher. The federal government is spending a bucket of money, and that's just on book. But right now interest payments are only about 1/8 of program spending. But that's because the prime rate is under 3%. In the late Mulroney years, it was over 14. If it were to quadruple, imagine that the federal government, instead of paying $30-odd billion a year in interest payments, was paying $120 billion. Then it would be right back to that figure, a third of total spending. Where would they find the other $90 billion? Nobody has any idea. Imagine what would happen to Ontario or Quebec if interest rates were to go up. So why on earth have we gotten ourselves back into this problem? It's one thing to repeat a mistake that was last made 400 years ago by, say, Spain. It's quite another thing to repeat a mistake that was made 30 years ago by your own government. And yet, here we are again. We have borrowed too much in order to fund social programs whose effect on our well-being is actually negative anyway, and we are just waiting for interest rates to rise and cause the whole thing to come tumbling down. We've been there. We've done that. We shouldn't have. Why are we doing it again so soon? Let's stop before it's too late.